So we're grateful to have Shannon Morgan from the City of Asheville Code Enforcement Office here to talk about homestays and a couple of things. His cards are at the back. If you didn't sign in, the $25 no-show fee is in effect, so please make sure to be signed in. And we'll save questions for the end, so that goes for people on Zoom as well. So we'll pull the chat and address those when Shannon's done with his remarks. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. As Matt said, my name is Shannon Morgan. I'm with the City of Asheville, and I do the homestay permitting and inspections, also do enforcement for the same. So as one of the things I think that we see come up most, I want to get the elephant out of the room first of all. No short-term full house rentals are allowed in the City of Asheville unless already permitted. So again, we get those calls continuously. I'm dealing with a case right now. Somebody lives in New York, 4-bedroom house, been renting it. Those are the situations that are not allowed, never have been allowed in residential zone districts. Pardon me. They were at one time allowed in commercial, higher commercial districts. And we can go into that a little bit later, but the main thing is, unless somebody already has a permit, or unless something's been allowed by way of city council, some type of rezoning, a lot of townhomes, condos in the downtown area, got some special provisions. But the main thing is to remember and to pass on, throughout your offices, whatever the case is, no new full home short-term rentals are allowed within the city limits. Pardon me again. Maybe it is different in the county, as most everyone here probably knows, or whatever jurisdiction that you may be. But the main thing is with the city, and we don't allow it. So what I'm going to do today is go over a few definitions of things that we see calls on, questions on, stuff like that, and then go through a brief overview of the homestay ordinance and how the homestay ordinance is administered, and what we expect for the homestay ordinance to be operated correctly and efficiently. So let's see if this works. Which way here? There we go. So let's use this. The first thing I have, is it talks about the homestay definition. Homestay means lodging use that occurs in a private resident occupied dwelling unit where up to 2 guest rooms are provided for transients for compensation for periods of less than 30 days, and where it is subordinate and incidental to the main residential use of the building. A homestay may or may not have a separate kitchen, bathroom, and or entrance, and a homestay is considered a lodging use under this UDO. So a couple main takeaways here that we want to talk about for the homestay definition is, one is it talks about less than 30 days. Okay. Permit is required for less than 30 days. However, if you do have a homestay permit and the individual wants to operate for more than, do 30-day rentals, that does not negate the permit. The permit is still valid. They can do either one, but they can't do less than 30 days without the homestay permit and, of course, being present on the property. So, as I mentioned with the elephant in the room, the very first question, the very first thing that I mentioned was talking about short-term vacation rentals. This definition is still in the UDO, has not been taken out, only because we do have full home short-term rentals that are occurring out there in non-residential districts, mostly in the CBD is where we see most of those. But anywhere that a lodging use was allowed prior to January of 2018, those individuals could have gotten a change of use to change it from a residence to a lodging use. Then I think there was some issues there with that, and City Council then, determined that unless you were in the resort zoning district, or if you wanted some type of conditional rezoning for your property, maybe for new developments or something like that, is the only way those are being reviewed. But resort zoning district, and that's a question that we get a whole lot, for properties in the resort zoning district, or really just have 2 large, and really you could almost say 3, but the Grove Park Inn is a zoned resort, and that's, of course, privately owned. And the Crown Plaza is owned privately and is zoned resort. The only other little portion of the resort zone that I'm aware of, and there may be another one, but is the old Richmond Hill property. At one time it was zoned resort. And, so I don't know what's occurring on that property now after the fire years ago and stuff like that. But that is our resort zone property. So when somebody calls you and says, hey, I want to do a short-term rental, I see it's allowed in resort zone properties, unless they can buy the Grove Park Inn, they're probably not going to get to do it. And I'm not sure how many people can buy the Omni. But anyway, that's the main thing. I'm not really going to go over this definition. Everybody can see what the definition is. But because we don't allow it, there's not a lot to go over for that. But the main thing is we do get the calls too. This property is being offered as short-term rental. You can definitely check with us and see. We do have records of those. A lot of times you can call the main number, our pod number a lot of times, and we can, our zoning department, we can answer those for you. Is there a permit for 145 Biltmore Suite 10, whatever it may be? Most of the time we do have some form of records on that, but they can be a little hard to decipher. A lot of those were approved by city council through the rezoning process and through the original permitting process. So they may or may not have us having that information in our permit software. But eventually somewhere we should have a record of how many units we're allowed to do it. I think one like it comes to mind is like the Harris. I think only the 10th floor is allowed to be able to be done short-term rental. So, that's pretty easy. Somebody wants to buy one, it's on the 10th floor, they do it short-term rental. They can't, and don't hold it to the 10th floor, but it's something like that. It's one floor only in the area. So they made they made allowances like that for short-term rentals. Again, lodging, pretty easy definition. Renting a room for transient stay, that kind of goes back to the homestay where it's considered a lodging use for the UDO. So, and that's anything with less than 1 month. So, pretty easy one there. Kitchen is one that we get a lot of questions about or used to prior to December of last year. This, is talking about the preparation of cooking food. The kitchen is not as questionable now as it was. As many of y'all know, city council had put in place at one time about regulating the size of sinks, size of refrigerators, so on and so forth. Those items no longer are regulated. So any size sink, any size refrigerator in a unit or area that wants to be permitted as a homestay. The only caveat to that is we do not allow stoves, ranges, ovens, cooktops, unless the area has a full interior connection conditioned to the rest of the house. So, kind of the example I use, and it seems to work pretty good for my management, they like to want to come up with, is cooking a Thanksgiving dinner. So if you want a stove or have a stove in this area that you're doing a homestay, and let's say it's in a basement area, if you can take your turkey out of the oven and take it straight upstairs and set it on the table and start carving it, that's going to be an interior connection. But if you have to go outside the house, or if you have to go into an unfinished garage, then go up, we're counting a mudroom as a pass through to the steps as being a conditioned area. But no full kitchens, as in stoves or range and ovens, are allowed for a space that doesn't have that internal connection to be used as a homestay. Now, if they have a space that it doesn't have an internal connection, and let's say it's a permitted ADU, you went through a permitting process for an ADU, they would have to come back to the city and unpermit that space as an ADU and turn it into additional living space, even though it don't have an internal connection, which would mean taking the stove range of it out of that space and it then being an additional living space. Challenges to that sometimes are if you take it out of a status of like an ADU, and there's probably a 99.9% chance this would never happen, but if the code changed in some form or fashion that wouldn't allow a certain zoning district to have an ADU, or they changed the code in a size or something like that, you might not be able to reestablish that. So make sure that if someone's thinking about doing that, there is that one little 0.1% chance that an ADU might not be able to be reestablished should something change. Pretty simple definition here. Dwelling unit. We all know it means more than one rooms physically arranged to create independent housekeeping. Establishment for occupancy of one family, separate toilet, sleeping room, and kitchens. This is what we're looking for homestay is occupancy with one family. It needs to be the individual. The homestay is going to relate exactly back to the individual who is living there permanently and on a full-time basis. And I kind of touched on this a minute ago, talking about accessory dwelling unit. It means a separate, complete dwelling unit contained on the same lot as a structure of a single-family dwelling or business. Now, in December of last year, prior to December of last year, the code was not explicitly clear as to whether or not detached accessory structures could be allowed. Because it was not clear, we had a lot of properties that were able to either do some permitting and change things to where it was no longer an ADU, or we had some that actually built some structures that conformed to an accessory structure. In other words, no kitchen, or it didn't have a sink of the size that we were talking about, or didn't have a refrigerator. City Council in December of last year said no longer would any detached accessory structures be allowed, whether an ADU or whatever, but no detached accessory structures would be allowed to be a homestay. Now, if you have a current permit, you were permitted prior to December 21, then you can continue to use that as a homestay. If that use would ever cease for 180 days or more, then that individual that owns that could be in jeopardy of losing that permit. And we do have software that actually, goes back and will give us history of properties and the renting and stuff like that. That's how we're able to keep up with. Especially, it was more prevalent when we were doing renewals, and I'll get into that in a minute with the homestays. But we use this software to be able to drop in an address when we get a complaint. We can drop in an address and it'll pull up that ad if they've located it. And most of the time they have. It'll pull that up versus going in and trying to look at the ad. And the company that we've contracted with also gives us screenshots that they take randomly throughout the year. So, we can look back at those particular things. But the main thing to keep aware of is y'all are marketing properties, or somebody calls up and says, hey, I've got a detached accessory structure that has a valid homestay permit. To make sure that permit has continued to be valid, make sure that they continue to advertise it and rent it. And when the new owner takes over, if they're planning on doing that, they need to go ahead and continue doing it. We for homestays, there was a change in Wilmington that caused us to change things just a little bit in the way of permitting. But what we do ask is, if you do market a property or sell a property and it has a homestay on it, we want those individuals to reach out to us, because when we do our compliance check, which we do when the normal renewal process would come about, and we see that John and Susie were the permitter or was on the Airbnb site, let's say, using Airbnb for an example, but we go there now and it's two completely different names, we're going to try to reach out to John and Susie. Well, their email may not be no good anymore. They may, because they've sold the property. So then we have to try to reach out. We're not asking, there's no permit fee involved or nothing. We just need the information of the new owners on file and proof of residency so that we can make sure that they are living there, in fact, and are the primary, there is their primary residence. That goes for homestays across the board, whether it's detached accessory structures or whether it's 2 bedrooms within their main structure. Any properties sell, and they're going to continue. People see y'all very well market the property, and say has a homestay or has a short-term rental on the property. Somebody buys it with the intent of being able to continue that. We just need to update our records to make sure everything stays the same. Again, unless they're going to change the floor plan or something, there's no fees involved for that. Yes.
How do you determine if it's a primary residence?
We ask for 2 proof of residencies, governmentally issued. So, and that'll be on the in a minute for the homestay, but just to use the example, voter registration, driver's license, stuff by law that's required that you change once you move into North Carolina, let's say, or whatever the case is. The law states driver's license must be where you reside. We use tax documents, but we ask everybody to redact, the personal information, Social Security, whatever the case may be. But, that's the documents that we've been asked to use. We've always heard people say, well, can I use my utility bill? No. Can I use credit card bills? No, but those can go anywhere. But by law, the items that we ask for are supposed to be tied to the residence where you live. Okay, moving on from accessory dwelling. We'll get into the homestay standards here. And, most everybody is probably very familiar, with the homestay standards. There's not a lot here that I'm going to go over in this first section. It just talks about, what you can and can't do within the dwelling. Its permit is required for the homestay. Pretty easy there. This is the one that kind of, is a little bit of the change that they made in December. So I'll go over this in here quickly. The homestay operation shall be managed and carried on by a person who's 1, 18 years or older, and 2, is a full-time resident of the dwelling, and 3, present during the homestay term for the entire time large staying at the property. This goes to your question. To be a full-time resident, the person must reside on the property on a permanent basis, and it must be the person's primary home. For the purposes of homestay ordinance, a person can only have 1 primary full-time residence, and the homestay must be operated from that primary full-time residence. In order to be present during the homestay term, the full-time resident shall be present overnight at the property and not away on vacation, visiting friends or family, traveling out of town for business, personal reasons, etc. during the homestay term. And then it goes on, however, the resident be temporarily absent from the property for purposes related to normal residential activities, shopping, working. We're not looking for, you to be bound there all day, 24 hours a day when guests are there. Believe me, I've gotten chastised about that before. And, that is not the intent. The intent is for somebody to be there overnight. And I've never really, truly got the full direction from City Council back when this ordinance was started back in 2015 or rewritten in 2015. But I feel like the biggest thing is 1, if you're there overnight, if the homeowner or the applicant is there overnight, you're not going to have no loud noises after 10 or 11 o'clock because you yourself have to get up, even though these people are on vacation. Second is if there's parking issues on the street, if it's a narrow street, and you can advise them on where not to park on the street if you don't have off-street parking for them. And lastly is, with you living on the property, you're going to be more apt to maintain the property and keep it neat, nice, clean. So, when you have the full home rentals, those items that I just mentioned seem to be the ones that we get the most complaints on. So I feel like that's the ones that City Council was trying to address in making sure that the applicant, homeowner, whoever it may be, is present on the property, noise, parking, and trash. Because when we get complaints on full home rentals, it's almost always related to noise or too much parking on the street. They're blocking somebody's driveway, need to get up at 6 and go to work, and stuff like that. So I feel like being present overnight is the main thing, and also being present overnight. Still, that house is still being used more like a residence. It's not being used as a revolving door every weekend, every week. Somebody different is there. You living or the individuals that you're marketing the property to living there is a residence. They know who their neighbors are most likely on each side of the house or across the street if they choose to do so. So that's the main thing, is them being present. What I always tell people when I do the permitting is, one of the unique things about the homestay is to make sure and look ahead and plan out their calendar. That's one of the biggest things. If they know they're going to be out of town in the last week in December, go ahead and block that off, because before they know it, somebody's got that calendar, and then you've made plans to leave. And if you leave, or if they leave and go on vacation or go out of town, then they are not meeting this requirement and subject to enforcement. This is going back to what you're talking about there and the question you asked, talking about applicants affirm that they live on the property. That is, or have only 1 primary full-time residence, and a minimum of 2 documents establishing proof of residency shall be supplied when the approved list. This is not applied to property owners acting as co-applicants. So what they did back in December was, made it available for owners to be co-applicants. Basically, all we need is the owner's name and signature on the application, in addition to the tenant. But the tenant is the one that provides, if that is the case, which a lot of times it is, tenant's the one that provides the proof of residence. And so, that's how that lands for the proof of residency. And again, we have that list on the application, but the ones that we see almost, primarily is the election. You're registered to vote, because that's pretty easy to do. Most of it can be done online. Now, I know when it gets close to election time, they stop the online and make you do it either in person or you can't, whatever the case may be. Driver's license, I hear horror stories on that all the time about people trying to go to the DMV and can't get their driver's license. You can get a temporary driver's license, and then we ask that you furnish the original when you finally get it. Vehicular registration, I think, is pretty easy to change. We use that because by law, the vehicle shall be registered where you reside, and vehicular insurance, stuff like that, is supposed to be where you reside. So that's and tax documents, but we see very few tax documents because most of the time people that are coming in to do this have moved here with the intent of doing that, and their 21 returns were from somewhere else. So, no activities other than lodging provided, and this talks about, that there's nothing shall prevent the use of the homestay, as I mentioned earlier, for residential use of greater than 30 days would not interrupt the validity of the homestay permit. So, used to, I think we were a little bit unclear on that back in 15. If it's a homestay permit, you should be doing less than 30 days. If you're doing more than 30 days, you really don't need the permit. And if you have the permit, then why do you have the permit if you're doing more than 30 days? So, but now it's clear, there's not an issue there. If your customer wants to do less than 30 days, that's fine. Then they get into it and they say, you know what, I'm tired of having people cleaning this house, and I'm tired of people being here every weekend. I found a traveling nurse that wants to stay here for 90 days. That's fine. Won't change the validity of the permit, but you do need the permit to do less than 30 days. No additional street parking is required for homestay. And, that goes back to the years, many, many years ago before zoning was ever incorporated into the city of Asheville. A lot of houses didn't even have driveways nor even parking spaces. A lot of people didn't have cars, so there wasn't a lot, or there was just one car for a family of 4 or a family of 6. Now there's sometimes 4 cars for a family of 4. So, the parking is definitely an issue, but I think, from what I remember on the original going through the permitting and writing this ordinance, they didn't feel like that it would be fair to houses over in North Asheville or houses in West Asheville that were built back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s when there was barely a 1-lane street down through there to make people put in driveways and stuff like that. Now, for new houses, of course, they have to minimum parking spots, street parking, so on and so forth. But, we have that question, and it does make it tough for permitting, not really the permitting part, but when we do permit one of these and it is an narrow street, that we get complaints off of parking. But again, there's nothing that we can do about it unless the street is marked no parking this side of the street or no parking here, whatever the case is, parking is allowed. Only one homestay permit per parcel per lot. Homestay permits shall be limited to one per person, immediate household, LLC, corporation, trust, or legal entity. A person's immediate household shall include a spouse, children, or any relative living in the same home. A more than 30% ownership in the LLC, corporation, trust, or other legal entity shall be sufficient ownership to constitute ownership for the purposes of this limitation. So, that's they tried to, I think, rewrite a little of that right there to keep from a lot of investors coming in and buying. It's set up for people to move here, live here, stay here, not people to come in and buy and live somewhere else. So this goes back to what I was talking about earlier in the detached accessory structures. I actually put this in there. Homestays may not be located within a detached accessory structure, except that permits were permitted prior to December 14, 2021, and may continue provided the homestay permit is maintained per section 17.3, and detached structures connected by a breezeway or other enclosed but unheated space shall not be deemed one dwelling for the purposes of subsection. So y'all are probably pretty familiar with what constitutes attached and what don't. We get this question a whole lot. I'm going to build a detached structure and I'm just going to connect it with a porch or a coverway. Does that count? No, it don't. It has to be a conditioned space between one space and another, if it's a detached area, to be able to have it be considered additional living space. A breezeway will not count for that or anything like that. And the building code, our zoning code and building code follow step in that. So, somebody buys a property and while they're buying it, they're talking to you and say, well, I'm going to build a structure over here to try to do a homestay in, and I was going to put a breezeway. You can go ahead and tell them that, that thought will not work. It needs to be a conditioned space that sheetrock, heated, cooled, windows, whatever the case may be, to be considered additional living space. And again, it goes back to on section 717.3, and that's going to talk about, the use ceasing for 180 days. Off the top of my head, that should be what that would refer to. No signage be allowed for homestays. I always mention that. I do have the question come up quite a bit. Well, what if I want to put a sign up for parking? If you want to put the word guest parking and you have off-street parking space or have off-street parking, you just put guest parking, I'm fine with that. What we're talking about is a sign out the street, real estate size sign or something that says, stay here at Bob's, find us on Airbnb, whatever the case may be. That's advertisement in the residential neighborhood, because homestays are allowed in a lot of districts, but, we almost always see them in residential neighborhoods, and no signage is allowed in residential neighborhoods. So we want to keep that, because when you start allowing signage, then you're going to start, getting into a different type of feel versus the residential. And then lastly, it goes into exterior lighting. Shall comply with the lighting standards in the UDO. So, we have very little issues with that most of the time, but we do have people, who, and we're glad for it, try their best to light up a walkway, a pathway, steps, whatever the case is, to keep somebody from, from being injured in trying to make it to the property. This one here, this talks about maintaining liability insurance on the property. So, I have found out, and maybe most of y'all in here know, but if you have somebody who's looking to do a homestay, and it's something that I usually go over when I do the inspection, is making sure they got the proper insurance. A good 70 or 80% of the time, most people have already checked with their insurance company, but a lot of times they don't realize to check with their insurance company. A simple homeowner's policy most always will not cover a homestay. Most insurance companies consider it to be a commercial use in a residential house or property. They consider transients coming on off the property as being a commercial use, and there is usually an umbrella or a rider that is required to be able to do the homestay. Just your simple homeowners will not cover these type of uses. I hear people say, Airbnb has up to $1 million. Well, that's fine if somebody wants to trust that. I don't know how I would feel about trying to deal with Airbnb if somebody got injured on my property. It's just, have your clients take that into consideration. They get that $1 million once they sign up to Airbnb either way. I don't think it matters. I don't know that it's directed towards bodily injury or if it's just property loss or whatever the case is. But from what I understand, and maybe some in here have know about it, my understanding is a rider or an umbrella to put a liability for this is relatively extremely cheap compared to what one fall or one injury could be. Again, very simple here. The homeowner operator pay all applicable taxes. Basically, I think the city was thinking about occupancy taxes there. If you use Airbnb, VRBO, if they use those get submitted automatically, so it doesn't matter. And again, homestay area compare with applicable building codes. Basically, what I'm looking for when I go to do the inspection is a window or a door out of that space that meets minimum building code for egress and smoke detector. And the fire marshals asked me to start looking for, many years ago they did, for carbon monoxide detector. Now, of course, somebody has an all-electric home and doesn't have a garage to park a car in. I can't make them or request them to put a carbon monoxide, because more likely there's nothing there to create carbon monoxide. But it is a checkbox that they can check off on an ad on a VRBO or Airbnb ad, because people look at those and say, well, then do they have a carbon monoxide? And then talking about this section doesn't apply to homestays legally established, but non-conforming properties are eligible for homestays. What they're speaking of there is when you look at section 716, it's a use by right section. So most of the time, if you have a non-conforming use, anything in the use by right won't allow you to do it. But they made the exception to say that, because so many people were looking for a way to do this, and especially, when this program first really got kickstarted back in 2015, we had a lot of tenants who were looking for ways to be able to, they purchased a property or they wanted to purchase property, but they didn't have the income, but their owner or landlord would let them rent. So the intent was, was not to keep anyone from being able to do a homestay and being able to make the extra funds. So that is that. I think it pretty well. It's kind of probably short and sweet, but this is my contact information. Again, the biggest thing is, and the calls that we get, and I'm sure that the calls that y'all get is, I want to buy a property in the city and do a full home short-term rental. Not happening unless it's already been permitted. They're definitely welcome to check with outlying. I'm sure that y'all would for them, outlying areas for whatever jurisdiction they may be in, Buncombe County, Woodfin, Weaverville, White Mountain, whatever the case may be, to see what their rules and regulations are. But, I know that, we receive a lot of calls. Sometimes it's just from people that have heard y'all tell them it can't be done, then turn around and call us anyway. Because they really and truly want to do a full home rental, but because they feel like that's where the money is, and I'm sure it is. But until something changes, and I don't think it'll change here in the city, but the only other place that something could change to make that viable down the road would be if something ever changes in general legislature. But at this point in time, the city, I don't see ever making a change to allow full home rentals in a residential zone district.
Okay, thank you, sir. For questions, so if you on Zoom can hear, we're gonna use the mic, that's okay.
Should we,
For the Airbnb and the VRBO takeout, they have the figures from the city of Asheville. They don't have to pay anything separate to y'all.
The tax thing I'm not that clear on because we don't deal with it, but I can tell you up front and forward that the city gets zero occupancy taxes for anything that's done.
Okay.
Those go to the TDA, and then I think a small portion of it goes to the to Buncombe County. But those taxes are withheld based off of I guess the figures that Airbnb or VRBO have.
Right.
And then they submit them as to whether or not TDA or Buncombe County checks up on that to see whether or not they're truly getting every dollar they're supposed to get. I don't know. But the unfortunate thing is, and I have multiple opinions on that I will not express now, but the city of Asheville doesn't get a dollar, which is a shame.
Okay. And do you know if the ETJ is?
There is no ETJ.
There's no ETJ anymore. Okay.
General Assembly took ETJ away about 3 to 5 years ago now. Extraterritorial jurisdiction. It was an area that the city could require permitting for, but the county still had. So in other words, we had zoning. We could issue and do zoning and building permitting for it, but that's about as far as we had. And what it was set up for, I think, back in the years it was a properties that the city felt that the city was going to take in one day. Extraterritorial jurisdiction. It was properties the city might take in. So those properties, they wanted to go ahead and start permitting and get up to city standards. And then the General Assembly, took that out. So there is no such thing as GTJ. You have a question?
So to be clear, if someone owns property in the city limits of Asheville and they have a full-time renter and they also have space that can be rented out on short term, that full-time renter could be the person who was registered with you all as the person staying there all the time.
That's correct. Yeah, they would be the person that would be registered with us as the permitting. Now, what we are looking for, and this is always sometimes becomes a challenge because the landlord is looking, they're looking to make money any way that they can and whatever ways they can. So what we see a lot of times is, well, I want to be the operator of the Airbnb. Well, they can't be the operator because they're not the permitter. So we're looking for the permitter and the little face sometimes you see, it don't have to be that face, but name, whoever is the applicant is going to be the person that we're going to see on the Airbnb ad. Now, I'm not going to say the owner couldn't be a co-host or something like that, but the primary host, and that's where a lot of times landlords run into a problem because the money that's attributed to that, it comes from the stay, will most of the time go to the individual who is the applicant, because that's what we're looking for. And that's the way it should be. If the applicant is the landlord or is the tenant, that tenant is looking for additional way to be able to make their bills and be able to make their money. But we've had landlords who, don't want that. They want to have the tenant be the applicant, but they also want to be the Airbnb operator. So
I have a question. How long does the permit process take, and what's the cost to get the permit?
Shannon, clients of mine who have reached out to you and your office in the past have always been really, really happy with the quality of information they've gotten. So I just want to say thanks for that, because folks who are trying to do it the right way, trying to follow the rules, y'all are the best.
Thank you.
Quick question.
Yes.
Folks who already have homestay permits on file no longer have to renew them annually. Is that correct?
That's correct. Now, I was going to get into that in a few minutes. I'm glad you went ahead and brought that up. So with some changes that happened in Wilmington due to a lawsuit, the city no longer is requiring renewals. In other words, there's no permit fee, there's no inspection, there's no review, nothing like that. What you have is what you have. If you make changes, or if you have a client who makes changes or whatever to the floor plan, if they want to add another bedroom, maybe they started out with one bedroom and they want to do two, then we just ask them to get in touch with us, give us a new floor plan. Most likely won't be any fees or anything like that. It's similar to when somebody sells a property and a new owner takes over. We just want the updated information. Now, for somebody who's never had a permit, 10 Town Mountain Road, whatever, and somebody has bought it, then there's fees associated with that. We go through the full review and do the full inspection. And if somebody did change from one bedroom to two, we would want to come out and inspect that property. But there is no longer renewals required for any of the homestays that we used to do back of this.
Got it. Thank you.
Very well.
Hey there. What happens when you find someone in violation of the rules you set forth for the homestay?
Okay, so there's a couple different, this can be attributed a couple different ways. One is, you mentioned the homestay. If it's a homestay and we have a permit for the homestay, a lot of times I'll try my best, depending on how egregious the violation is to go into our permit software and reach out to them either by phone or email and say, hey, we got a complaint this weekend. What happened? And they say, well, had a medical emergency. We had to leave, okay. They said nobody was there. We just want to know why. That, very rarely happens. Majority of my homestay permitters hardly ever have any problems with it. So, that doesn't happen. The situation we get into the most is full home rentals where they've never pulled any permits, don't intend to pull a permit, nor could they even get permit. So that's a notice of violation. We give them 30 days to comply, which means stop the rental. Or if they just didn't realize that they could get a homestay, then we help them try to get the homestay permit. If they, say, the heck with y'all, this is too good of money, I'm not stopping. They keep doing it. Then after we confirm that and realize that after 30 days come and gone, they're still operating, then we'll move to a citation. Citation's $500 a day. That adds up pretty quick. So a lot of times that will get their attention quicker than the notice of violation. Notice of violation clearly says on there that you will be subject to a $500 a day fine if you do not come into compliance. So, the notice of violation and the citation is our ways to be able to pull, to get properties in compliance. And we do have the ability now to start, probably going to start taking individuals to small claims court. If those fines have not been, if they still continue and the fines start accruing up to a certain point, then we'll take them to small claims court and start trying to, collect that. Don't want anybody in the world to think, the city, that money that comes to us goes to the school system, goes to school board, school system. The General Assembly again set that up, and rightfully so. They didn't want town, city, municipalities being able to use that as a tool to be able for revenue. So it goes to the school system. The city has nothing, when it comes to enforcement is not a money-making endeavor or, like some of the other departments within the city, the water department, whatever, where they have to be able to, they start out in the red and try to end up in the black by the end of the fiscal year. Code enforcement's not like that. Any fines that we issue do go to the school system.
Let me address the Zoom question. How long does the permit process take and what is the cost for the permit fee?
I'll do the last part first, $208. Easy enough to answer that one. It's $208 permit fee. And secondly, it kind of just depends. Most of the time it's around 5 to 10 business days turnaround on the permit. And that has really gotten into the 5 and 7 day turnaround because we're not doing renewals. When I was doing renewals, it could be up to 10 to 15 days just because I had renewals packed in there in between doing the main permitting. But, 5 to 10 business days. And basically that is the approval of the permit. Then what happens is once the permit's been approved, the applicant then gets notice that the permit's been approved. They then pick a time on for us to come out and do the inspections. Currently, I'm doing inspections on Mondays and Tuesdays. Got morning times on Mondays and afternoons on Tuesdays. And if something just absolutely doesn't work out for somebody, they work 4/10s or whatever the case is, we try to find, I can adjust my schedule to make, those go. But most time, people want the permit, they usually find a way to make a Monday or Tuesday work.
And there are two quick questions. One, how much enforcement is complaint driven versus anything proactive that you or the city's doing? And secondly, it already filled me in. Go ahead, the first one if you don't mind. I'll think of the second one.
Most all right now, due to staffing, most all of ours is complaint driven. We do have from time to time, if I'm scrolling through something and scrolling through our software and see that, something's just very blatant, I'm like, I haven't seen this before. What happened here? Then we'll address it. But majority of the time, most of it is complaint driven. And we, I think a lot of properties in the city are in compliance, and I think that a lot of people know that there is enforcement. So, we don't have as much as we did back in 15, 16, 17 when we were getting this program going. We don't have as much violations now as we used to. Because people know what the rules are. With technology nowadays, the internet, there's no reason that you can't find out that something's required to do this type of rental in the city.
The second question is, you touched on this earlier, I think the answer is no, but for downtown, we had talked about there were some buildings that had special permission to be able to do it, a 10th floor or a section or a whole building. Is there any way to access or a list compiled of what those are, or they have to be looked at individually? Because sometimes we'll get clients will ask like, hey, I've heard there are some downtown condos that allow that, but I don't have really any way of knowing which ones do and which ones don't.
Yeah, good question. And it is challenging. A lot of times the good thing about it is to a certain extent, if somebody already has one and they're selling a property, that's easy enough for us to track because most of the time we're going to have that record. I got an email last week or this week one about an email blast that went out about some properties getting ready to come available down on Biltmore Avenue. And I had to get my process manager, Chris Collins, to be able to determine what property they were talking about and what type of allowances were given. Because at the level we're at, a lot of those projects go through at the Planning and Urban Design Department up on the 5th floor of City Council, City Hall. So we don't know a lot of times until we start getting those phone calls. And when we get them, then we have to go back and research, what properties was this property afforded, short-term rental. And if it was, hey, meaning what units. And, so we can usually track that down, but to have just a general blanket thing out there, no, we don't have that.
So with our process, for example, if a buyer's under contract and they want to verify that a homestay is possible, would the actual current owner, meaning the seller, have to apply for the homes? Like if a buyer wants to speed up the process and you said 5 to 10 business days, for example, during due diligence, would the seller that actually owns the property currently have to be the one to apply for it for y'all to get the process going? And then once the property sells and you've approved it, it's fine. However, the seller's still on the permit, which doesn't have to be renewed. But once the property sells, the buyer then calls you guys and says, hi, I'm the new owner. Please put my name on the permit. Because sometimes our buyers are in a hurry or want to make sure that they can do something that they want to do. So the seller would have to be involved with the city to apply for it.
That's one way to do it. I mean, the biggest, that's definitely one way, I guess, to kind of speed it up. But I don't know really to a certain extent that the buyer, what they've really speeded up, because they can't do any renting until they have changed that over to us, and they've still got to get the proper documents to show proof of residency. And if they've moved here, there may be a little bit of a delay in being able to get that, because legally, if they're under contract, they can't go to the DMV and say, hey, I'm going to change my address, because they really don't live there. But that definitely could be an avenue to go, because it does give the other individuals don't have to rent it. I mean, they don't even have to make an advertisement if they don't want to. So the owner, the current owner, they can go ahead and go through the process if they want to, and then all they have to do is have the other individual submit it, their proof of residency, but they legally can't start advertising until they have got those documents and submitted them to us. So, time-wise, they, may not have really gained that much.
So all they've gained is basically you guys inspecting it, visiting it, telling you sure.
Exactly.
But then they're not allowed to rent it on day one because they still have to prove their license.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. And, what we find sometimes on those situations is, the owner takes over, the new owner takes over and says, this don't feel like I thought it would, then they want to do a different room, or they want to change it up or something, or maybe they, so they may still have to come in and change something. So, it definitely could speed up things just a little by a permit already being on file. Maybe in some cases it might even, even though they don't advertise it, it might help somebody build a little bit more value in their home. I don't know if that's what they're getting at or not, but I think I don't know that pulling a permit sometimes to build value in the home is really going to do it, because if I was an individual looking to purchase a home, I'd want to look and see how many times it's been rented. What's your what's your monthly rental rate? Not just that I've got a permit. Well, the new owners can get a permit just as easy as the old owners can.
Thanks for being here. I really appreciate all the answers. Quick question for you. So short-term rental permits that have already been given and are grandfathered in for the whole house STRs, those are different than homestay permits.
Correct.
So could somebody have a grandfather STR permit and also then operate their house as a homestay?
Probably. I mean, I guess it could, but I don't really know what their advantage of that would be. I mean, you're looking at
You're only allowed to have one homestay permit.
One homestay permit per property. But,
two different houses. So.
Yeah, if it's two different houses, and, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think they'd be very extremely rare, I guess it's possible, to see that possibility, because short-term vacation rental permits are only issued in commercial districts.
Right.
And homestays, primarily, most of the time, we're seeing those. They are allowed in all districts, most all districts, but we're seeing those primarily mostly in residential districts. So that's the reason I say I don't know that we would see it. I don't see that we could, if they're on the property, if they own two, if they owned 2 units.
It's a rare situation.
Yeah, extremely rare. If they own 2 units above the Crest building and up before the Crest building, and they lived in one and rented the other one, then I think there's a possibility they could do a homestay. But I think that's going to be very rare.
Okay, thank you.
Last question.
How many permanent homestays are there now?
I want to say in the area, and I'm sorry I didn't look that number up before I left, but somewhere around 700 to 800. And we do have on our GIS, there's a couple different things that person can look up. You can go to our online GIS, and when you go to the online GIS, there is a slew of maps that you can look up, everything from Snow Mapper to Crime Mapper to whatever. And one of them is a homestay map. So, if you're looking for a property, you can go to that GIS link and you can look it in there. You can put that address in there. And when you put that address in there, it should zoom in to that property and it'll say H if it has a homestay or not. So that's a pretty easy way to be able to see, to confirm if somebody says, when they call up and say, I've got a homestay here on the list of a property, if you want to double check.
On the Buncombe GIS or?
City of Asheville, Map Asheville.
Map Asheville.
So in regards to the lawsuit in Wilmington and how they basically, sued and said it's illegal to tell a person what they can and can't do with their property. Do you see that happening in Asheville? Somebody
No, because
changing that?
we're not telling you can't have a homestay. I think what Wilmington did was did it kind of larger. And of course, no. I think Wilmington went about it in a way to where it was some type of a lottery possibly. So, if you didn't get drawn, then you didn't have that opportunity. But if the code, and I think that's the reason they won the lawsuit, if the code says you can do whatever type of rentals they call theirs, then you should be able to do it. So the city doesn't keep you from being able to do a homestay. We don't have a sunset or a sunrise, setting on that. We don't have a certain number, and nor do I ever see it. Have I ever even heard it being discussed, of capping at a certain number, because it's not fair. The code says you can do a homestay, you should be able to do it. What the code does say is you can't do full home short-term rentals no more. And, that's a type of use. And the city has the ability to be able to regulate that. I think the way Wilmington went about it is where they got in. Their problem was, it's allowed, but no, you can't do it because your name didn't get dropped. I think this is how I understood the lawsuit. But again, not an attorney, but that's I understand.
Do homestay permits expire?
They do not now. They used to under the renewals.
So, because you mentioned something about 180 days stay if it's not rented.
So that's for the short-term rental vacation permits.
Okay.
So if you do not use it for 180 days, then there is a possibility that it could be, no longer allowed. And the same thing goes for the detached structures that were given permits. If they stop using those within 180 days, then, they will lose those for sure.
If a basement apartment does not have interior access, I know you said you can't have an oven, can it still get a permit?
That's correct. You can get a permit. You just can't have a stove, range, or oven if it does not have an interior access. And again, if it's been permitted previously and there is a current permit on file for an ADU, maybe it's permitted as ADU, we won't touch it until that ADU status has been removed, accessory dwelling part, and turned into additional living space. It can be additional living space and not internally connected. I have a rec room downstairs, and somebody says, you know what, kids are grown, they're not using this anymore. We're going to start, we need to rent this out. So they put a bed in down there, it has a bathroom, and they put a refrigerator in there and sink, and they already have a sink maybe, and they're good to go. But the interior connection part has to be there for the stove, range, or oven.
Another question on Zoom. Is there an inspection fee in addition to the permit fee?
No, it's all one. $208 get you everything.
The Zoom people will feel left out.
So what I'm hearing is that you follow the rules, you have ingress and egress, it's not detached. You pretty much can say to your clients, it will qualify if you meet their expectations as a homestay.
Correct. Yeah. Very, very, very rare have I had to disapprove a homestay. The biggest thing I disapprove for is egress. As y'all have seen, being realtors, a lot of times basement areas, as we all know, are constructed or reconstructed or deconstructed or whatever over weekends and over years ago without any permits. Well, they never changed no windows. That's how we know they ain't got no permits for it. I go to do a homestay and they have purchased a home as being a 4-bedroom home, and they counted the basement room as a bedroom just for purposes of listing or purposes of appraisal, whatever the case may be. I got to do the homestay, and they've got a window that's 6 inches by 6 inches, and casement window, and you have to have a ladder to get to it, So that's where I find most of the time the areas that I have to disapprove or put on hold. Almost always there's a remedy for it. It may not be the remedy that the owner wanted or the applicant wanted. Maybe they really felt like they wanted their bedroom in the back area back here, but they also are putting people in a dungeon if there's a fire in the area out front. There's nowhere for them people to get out. And when I break it down like that, that's when it scares the hell out of them, excuse the language, and they start realizing, oh, okay, I see what's going on. So they'll sometimes move their bed out before the door is and turn it into a studio. And I think that's part of the reason that one time that we wanted to do the renewals is to make sure, and of course, somebody can definitely, they want to go to all the trouble, move the bed back, show it like it was when I left there. But very rarely do we ever see that, because whatever pictures is on the ad is what they expect, it's what the customers expect. And we'll see a complaint, we'll see something on the reviews that says we stayed in a bedroom that wasn't really shown on the ad, But, almost always I can find a way to permit the homestay if it's something other than what they wanted to do. Yeah, they wanted the bed in the back here just because it felt like a bedroom and they could shut the door. But to get the homestay, they're willing to go ahead and move it out here. And what I've had happen a lot of times is they'll go ahead and move the bed out here, start renting, start making money. And in about 6 months, they'll come back and they'll cut in a window with an approved building permit that says, what the building code allows in the way of egress. Like it has to be so far out, it has to have a ladder, different things like that, So I've had a lot of people who really and truly want their bedroom back there just because they feel like it feels more private. And they'll go ahead and put a window in, down the road. And then we'll come back out and re-inspect it and get it going. We'll see more questions on the Zoom.
Yeah, that was fantastic, Shannon. I think this is a great example of be the source of the source. For clients that have questions, I will reach out to Shannon. Thank you so much.
What is it we don't allow?